Good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in for this webinar on building the MGA of the future. I'm Matt Scott from Insurance Data Lab. Before I introduce today's fantastic line of panelists, I'm going to speak with Dan King about some of the new MGA research that we've been working on. Hi, Dan. Firstly, can you explain what this research is all about?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So we've been analysing annual company accounts to help assess the financial performance of MGAs. And to be included in the analysis, an MGA needs to have filed full accounts at Companies House for each of the last 3 years, as well as reported positive revenues and had at least 10 members of staff. And we've calculated a percentage score for each MGA across 3 key pillars: growth, profitability, and productivity, and combine these to create an average overall performance rating. For growth, we looked at the change in revenues and profits over the last 12 months. For profitability, we calculated the 3-year EBITDA margin. And for productivity, we looked at staff costs as a percentage of turnover over the last 12 months and the turnover generated per employee over the same period.
Thanks, Dan. And what are the results telling us?
Well, we've discovered that financial performance has been falling slightly over the last 3 years, with the average score dropping to 50% this year from a little over 52% in 2020. And that's been driven by a slowdown in growth and a small dip in profitability. We have, however, seen a slight rise in productivity ratings after an increase in average turnover per employee and a fall in staff costs relative to turnover. So this means that productivity is now the highest rated of those 3 pillars that make up the research, with an average score of 54% compared to 49% for growth and 48% for profitability. And this increasing productivity is a really positive sign because it shows that MGAs are on a solid footing that should help to propel them to greater success in the future. I know the panel is going to talk about this later, but technology is likely to enable MGAs to make further productivity gains over time. And when it comes to overall performance by size of MGA, it's those MGAs with revenues in excess of £15 million that perform best. Medium-sized brokers with revenues between 5 and 15 million ranked second, and smaller brokers came in just behind that. So the average scores there for the larger MGAs are 53%, medium-sized 49%, and smaller brokers 48.5%.
And what about the individual MGAs? Have we seen any standout performers there?
Yeah, so 5 MGAs have come out particularly well, and we're recognising each of them with an Insurance Data Lab Gold Award. The top performing MGA is MPR Underwriting, with a really impressive score of 76%. It's the only MGA to score above 70% in this year's rankings. The other 4 MGAs picking up a Gold Award are Q Underwriting, Volante International, RSG Underwriting Managers Europe, and PolicyFast.
Fantastic, and congratulations to all 5 of those MGAs. Dan, can you also tell us how people will be able to access this research?
Yeah, so a full analysis, including scores for every MGA and a detailed explanation of our methodology, will be published in our inaugural MGA performance report. Everyone who's registered to watch this webinar today will receive a free copy via a link in this month's Insurance Data Lab email newsletter. And this report, along with other reports that we published on broker financial performance, insurer underwriting, and customer experience, will also be available to subscribers on our data insight platform.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Dan. So now I'd like to introduce our panel for today. So please welcome Mike Keating, the CEO of the MGA Association, Bright Blue Hare founder Shan Millie, and Geo Underwriting CEO Jaime Swindle. Welcome all of you, and thanks for joining us today.
Good morning.
And there we go. Brilliant. Thanks, Jaime.
Good morning.
So before we get started, I just wanted to point out that we want to make this discussion as interactive as possible. So please do submit any questions or comments that you may have through the Q&A button, which should be either at the top or bottom of your screen. And then I'll put those to our panelists throughout the discussion we're going to have today. So to kick things off, one of the findings that Dan mentioned from our research is that growth in the MGA market has been slowing slightly over the past year. Jaime, we've had a lot of a talk around a capacity crunch in the MGA market. How has this been affecting things, and what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm glad the first question wasn't why am I not a 5-star MGA? So I'm only a couple of months into the job, so lots to aspire to in that regard. So yeah, the capacity crunch, as you've termed it, I think it is true to say that traditional capacity, as I would sort of refer to it, as being more selective. So we're definitely seeing a rationalisation of the volumes of MGAs that sort of traditional capacity is supporting. They're choosing to focus on fewer, larger relationships. And I think there's definitely a reduced appetite for marginal business as cost of capital is increasing. And I think one of the other bits that we need to be mindful about is a sort of a reduction in cannibalization, as some of those traditional capacity markets would see it, which is, supporting MGAs that maybe are accessing the same clients or distribution outlets that they would be in a more direct space. So there's a definite change in the traditional sense. But what I would say is what it means from an MGA point of view is that we really need to be clear on our purpose. So what am I as an MGA bringing to the table in order to get access to that capacity? Is it about the clients that I can access? Is it about my underwriting specialisms? Is it about the unique data or insights that I can provide? So whilst I think we're seeing a bit of a slowdown, we're definitely seeing more alternative capacity coming to the market and wanting to access this space. But that slowdown, I don't think, is making MGAs less relevant. It just means that we need to be really, really clear about our purpose, what it is that we're bringing to the table.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jaime. And Mike, what's your thoughts on the capacity crunch and what Jaime just said there?
Yeah, I suppose I don't necessarily agree with the word crunch. I think challenging in certain lines. So I would reference sort of professional indemnity as being, and financial lines being particularly challenging over the last couple of years. But effectively, when I look and speak to our members, to use the cricket analogy in terms of taking the pitch out of the wicket as such, be it a hard or soft market, if MJs are delivering on the expectations of the partnership with their capacity partner, then effectively those market conditions basically are irrelevant, because you have an expectation to deliver a ULR underwriting earnings, and effectively the MJ is doing all the things it's said to its insurer capacity that they will do, then effectively, the capacity is there for sort of long term. So, I think crunch is probably a bit sort of over the top on that, but I think challenging is probably where I would sort of place it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mike. And Jaime, coming back to you briefly, what do you think an MGA can offer to the market that is different from kind of the traditional insurer, I suppose?
So the two things that I guess my customers require of me, so specialism and service. And if I'm not providing one of those two things, ideally both at the same time, then I wouldn't be offering anything different to the traditional market. So, we have seen in that traditional marketplace broker segmentation. So it's changing those interactions between, the large carriers and the general broker market. Service is changing. There's more demand for self-service, technology-driven trading, which actually is probably pushing more opportunity out of that space. And as an MGA, I should be able to provide a specialism or a service to support with that. If it falls outside of the box, tends to fall into a black hole. So, as that kind of segmentation process is changing the interactions in the traditional marketplace, then actually that gives me more opportunity to drive that specialism, to drive a better service, and to not be competing toe to toe with a composite, because otherwise why would you be coming to me as an MGA? What am I bringing to the table that's different? So I think those are the sort of the two areas that I focus on every day is, is it a specialism? Is it service? And am I delivering what is required by my customers? There's no point in me trying to compete in a sort of a traditional sense, if you like, because that there would be no point in the MGA.
And Shan, if I can bring you in here, what do you think sets MGAs apart from the insurer market?
Hi everyone. Thanks very much for inviting me to participate here. Just to say, by the way, I have no control over the algorithm that is controlling whether I look like Frosty the Snowman's older sister or a human being. It's also not related, I don't think, to my brain activity. So I haven't gone to sleep if it suddenly goes white. But it's interesting the way you put that, and Matt, in terms of sets apart from. So I'm going to interpret that a little bit literally very briefly and just refer back to David Howden's barnstorming what's brilliant about MGAs at the MGA annual conference actually in June, and pull out a couple of the things that he said. So one of the things he said was that 40% of market capitalization is in distribution and not insurers. So I read into that, you're worth more. You're worth more. That sets you apart from the insurers. And the other thing he said was that MGAs are winning the war for talent. So I think that that kind of perspective is quite interesting actually. But obviously what we've just heard from Jaime, who's doing it, and Mike, who's been there, done that, is currently selling the t-shirts and doing all kinds of stuff as the MGA CEO. You know, real masterclass, I think, in the fundamentals of a successful MGA now. But I think for me, what the bit that I suppose I can contribute perhaps a useful view on is that bit of the MGA map. I don't want to call it a community because I don't really think it is. But it's not a homogeneous lump, is it, of firms? There's all different types of firms funded differently. And that part of it's the entity structure of choice really has been for the insurtech phenomenon for years. And so what does that mean? Well, I think two things. Those insurtechs who have chosen the MGA entity structure, and the majority of new firms have that are customer facing in any way, shape or form, they're founded by non-insurance folks, non-insurance market folks who are bringing tech and data expertise and vision that insurance didn't have and probably still doesn't. And I think then the other side of that is the insurtech firms then are also the flip side there, if you like, or the second bit of that is founders who've come from inside insurance. And, you know, some of them have actually described themselves to me as refugees from traditional insurance, because what they're fired up with the desire to finally be able to do things differently and better. So what that gives you is, you know, people who know the business from the inside and out, maybe not in its entirety, but who understand and who really want to make a difference. And that's fresh energy as well as, you know, allegedly, you know how I feel about all of you probably understand that I'm not drinking from the insurtech Kool-Aid, but I think that does give you, you know, some fresh energy. It gives you some potentially fresh tech, potentially also for insurers, you know, obviously the capacity, but also the enormous amount of investment that's gone into VC and corporate venturing, cash that's gone into that part of the MGA community map, if you like. You know, what they're getting there is a safe space to innovate and grow their markets because they're loaning their balance sheet generally in quite sort of rather, you know, contained ways to do things differently. So just a few thoughts on that, Matt.
No, thanks, Shan. Yeah. And Jaime, just hearing kind of Shan talking about the tech startups there, what's kind of Geo's view on these new entrants to the market and kind of what they're doing?
Well, I mean, what's Geo's view? What's my view? So I think there's a couple of bits, which is this space is ripe for innovation. We know that, and actually, what we see coming out of the MGA market is, you know, new products, new services, new innovation, new models that actually are a need that isn't being addressed in the traditional sense and enables a sort of a growth area. I don't think we can underestimate that whilst there is a huge need for technology, the difficulty in client acquisition, the difficulty in servicing what that looks like, and the difficulty that it comes to bringing that underwriting expertise and judgment. So I think it needs to be complementary. I'm not entirely sure the balance is quite there yet. So, you know, I have lots of interactions with insurtechs, and the biggest challenge they have is actually how do they manage the stuff that sits around the side? How do they actually get access to distribution that is sat in a traditional broking environment? How do they really demonstrate the deliverable and the changes that come with each of those risks, because it's not, you know, a homogenous environment. So I think there's a huge amount of innovation, huge positivity, but we shouldn't think that necessarily insurtech is the answer to everything, because ultimately there is still a lot of complexity with either accessing, servicing or distributing to customers.
And Shan, I saw you nodding along quite a bit there. Do you have anything to add to what Jaime just said, or?
Well, she's completely right, isn't she? I mean, Jaime and I were, no, it's certainly not a first. Jaime, don't say that. yeah, from different perspectives, we've kind of, I say we both were there, weren't we, Jaime, at the beginning of all of this, really, 2012, 2013. I still have in my mind that picture of you from the Post magazine collective. That's eons ago. That's taking us way back, isn't it? So again, I go back to that notion of the fundamentals of being successful and running any kind of insurance business, but particularly an MGA. And I think, you know, Jaime's saying, do you really understand the fundamentals? It's not enough now to be able to just come and say, I've got a cool piece of proprietary tech, I've got some really clever people, and I've got some cash that I can bring, and some talent and people that I can bring with me. Those things do still matter, but I don't know about you, Jaime and Mike, but there was a time when you thought, actually, the rhetoric, and also everyone seemed to get into a very sort of powerful piece of collective hysteria where the brains left the room, and it was all, you know, if you read certain stuff, or you went to the enormous number of conferences or what have you, or listened even to people that you thought were really sensible and kind of grounded, everyone got very, very excited about chucking out dinosaurs and you know, the old way of doing things, as if there was absolutely no value there, either in terms of the expertise, the knowledge, the rules of the game, the fundamentals. I mean, there was a lot of breathtaking arrogance as well as pure stupidity, but obviously people made lots and lots of money as well. I think those days broadly are gone now, and I think we're in a much more thoughtful, mature space where hopefully we can combine, as Jaime's saying, you know, the stuff you really need to know about operating in insurance, come with the desire to change, either as someone from the inside or from the outside, but you still have to be able to understand and play the game. There's stuff you need to know and to be able to do, and very specific stuff to be a successful MGA as well, I think.
And Mike, what's your view on kind of these new entrants and how they, I suppose, fit into the future of the market?
Well, I agree with, you know, unlike me, but I agree with everything Jaime and Shan have said. What I would add is that when I speak to insurtechs, they sort of highlight three pillars which they require. So number one is obviously funding. Number two is compliance support. And number three is capacity. So they're the three things which they look at, and we as an association can provide, with the exception of funding, we can provide support on all those other two main pillars. The key thing I see, and there's, you know, these are well documented, and it picks up on Jaime's point, is that I'm not sure they spend enough time around how they're going to acquire customers. So they have fantastic tech. They've invested a lot in that tech, and you know, it's very impressive. They get capacity, they get compliance support, they have funding, but then they think, well, how are we going to fill the hopper? How are we going to get customers? How are we going to break into especially if it's through brokers in particular, how are we going to actually acquire customers? How are we going to break into quite an established distribution model across the UK and Ireland effectively? And I think that's the challenge, and my counsel would be is that some more time needs to be spent in terms of that client acquisition and distribution, and perhaps not so much on the tech, because I think the tech is great, and that would be my advice in terms of sort of insurtechs.
Fantastic, thanks. And picking up on the tech side of things there, Shan, I know you describe yourself as a bit of an accidental techie. Where do you see technology having a big impact in the MGA market? Kind of
You're
like
being
AI.
kind. You're being kind, Matt. I don't describe myself as a bit of an accidental techie. I'm a complete accidental techie, right? And actually, that's kind of, I was thinking about this. It's a rather mysterious process, actually, of how I've become an accidental insurance obsessive as well. But I guess for me, the two things kind of go, you can't obsess about financial services and insurance, for me, unless you're also obsessing about the technology and the data. So yeah, I mean, what does accidental mean? Well, I didn't start out wanting to do this. I wanted to be an Egyptologist, actually, or an astronaut, but I too short-sighted and I didn't like physics, so that went out of the and I don't like heights either. So there was quite a lot against that. So again, that technology piece, right? So it's the fundamentals of success again, isn't it? And actually, I know I was sort of on a prep call, slightly sniffy, so only slightly, about the 3 pillars that the IDL ranking's talking about, because there's so many arguments about what the hell productivity means, and you know, in a government context at the moment, people are talking lots of rubbish. But actually in productivity, there's a really serious place for tech there, isn't there? That I don't think has been thought about quite in this way before. It hasn't been as important, material, pressing, directly impacting on productivity before. So I do think it's going to be important, but perhaps not in the same way as the, you know, the transformational tech people would. I mean, I can talk about that, but that's not what's interesting to me in this conversation. I think we have, let's get a little bit more precise about what we actually mean by technology for a start. And the guts of the insurance business, and Jamie's talked about this and Mike talks about it a lot, is the transparency over the business you're actually running. So it's the policy admin, it's the MI, it's your lot, being able, where are your loss, where are your claims, how are you, do you actually know what's happening? So getting any part of that journey wrong, particularly again for the newer and the growing MGAs, is so that bit of the technology, you know, the guts of running an insurance business is there's not been enough focus on that. I don't think, generally from inside a range of those firms that I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the years. And I certainly think from the point of view of looking at it analytically and saying, well, look, if we're looking for indicators of profitability, productivity and growth, where do technology choices fit in that? Can we predict in the way that a firm does or doesn't spend enough time on specification, for example, doesn't spend enough time on or doesn't have the right support to interrogate vendors who are very good at selling and understanding their solution, but they're not perhaps as expert and experienced in actually working out what that business needs and the level of support that some of those founders and founding teams are going to need. And so I think, you know, I think there really is a much more of a focus on the guts of the technology, if you like, the real sort of operational technology as being an indicator of, are you actually going to be able to run a successful business? When is the shit going to hit the fan or not? And you know, the worst case scenario that happens all too frequently, isn't it, is that all of the things that haven't gone quite to plan. I'm not even talking about implementing a new system, which, as we know, is a world of pain for MGAs, very large and medium sized and small. I'm talking about when that big contract lands, that transformational contract that's going to make the difference between you delivering to your capacity and not. That so many times is when all the stuff that hasn't happened properly comes home to roost and really can kill a business, can't it? So I think if that's kind of one way I think it's really useful to look at it. And I know that friends at Green Kite and other places are looking at, right, okay, how do we really deconstruct this and start making it vulnerable to analysis, but also at the same time being really practical about what are the indicators, what kind of testing schedule should you have in place, for example, as the non-technical experts, non-technology experts sat in smaller MGAs who may or may not have a CTO, and that CTO may or may not have direct insurance experience, for example.
No, fantastic. So, Mike, if I can come to you now, Shan obviously sees kind of the guts of the business as where the real focus should be on this. How do you see things, and what's your take on things like, I suppose, AI-driven underwriting, where that fits into the whole technology piece?
Okay, so probably 2 bits on that. So, you know, you have, for MGAs who actually operate on a B2B basis and not sort of B2 consumer, you know, you have 3 stakeholders. You have your capacity, you're obviously a stakeholder yourself, and then you'll have your brokers. So technology will sit amongst that. So effectively, that technology should be removing frictional costs. It should make brokers be able to interact with you as an MGA as seamlessly as possible, and then allow you as the MGA to interact with your capacity partner through the sharing of data and underwriting sort of results, etc. And if you do that properly with the right sort of IT sort of partner, then that will allow MGAs in particular to concentrate on what they're experts at in terms of underwriting. It's creating additional bandwidth for people to underwrite sort of better and more forensically, concentrate on new products, because effectively you have a platform technology which is doing all the things which you want it to do for all stakeholders, and therefore you're not spending all time in terms of having to, you know, rewrite bordereaux and trying to get bordereaux to your capacity partners, etc. So my view on that is that the greater dialogue and communication between the technology companies, because I think you know, the fault's been that they've not been included often enough in this sort of stakeholder discussion. So MGAs with a technology company, with the insurer, and to a certain degree with brokers, can only just basically remove frictional costs and just make that whole journey far smoother from that perspective. Turning to sort of AI, you know, I'm quite interested in terms of where AI is going to come. So there's a lot of noise and a lot of talk about sort of, you know, machine learning and use it for underwriting and pricing. I'd concede that I don't quite know yet who's really doing that properly. Okay, so I'm sure they are, but I actually haven't looked under the bonnet from that perspective. But what I do know is that AI is being used successfully, and one of our members use it successfully in terms of triaging operational sort of presentations. So effectively, you know, they have machine learning which will look at presentations for which brokers send in, and actually the machine learning will present that presentation to the underwriters and remove anything which is not relevant to actually pricing and assessing that piece of business. So machine learning is working very effectively there. So though the underwriters only see what they need to see in terms of pricing, accepting that business, not having to trawl through what could be a 30, 40 page presentation and then price it. So that to me is fantastic. And it comes back to my earlier point that it allows MGA underwriters, in terms of where their expertise at, to underwrite and price business.
So it's more about kind of, I suppose, an enabling device to get more out of the human element of things than kind of technology taking over type of thing. Yeah,
and again, you know, I think my sense is that, you know, AI will continue to become a more important part of sort of MGA insurers and brokers effectively. Yeah. But I, as I say, I haven't looked deep enough under the bonnet to sort of see, you know, where that sort of, where the chains are in terms of how successful that's been in terms of pricing.
Fantastic. And Jaime, you obviously oversee a number of MGAs in your new role. Where do you see technology going kind of as we look to the future?
So I think there's building on a couple of the points that have already been made, and then with a sort of more personal lens on it, and having, I guess, spent the last 15, nearly 20 years sort of technical delivery and development across the industry, there definitely isn't a one size fits all in the technology solution, because I guess the point from an MGA perspective is something that is unique, something that is a specialism, and something that is accessing or distributing things in a certain way. So there won't be a one size fits all technology solution. So I guess the way that I'm looking at it is, how do my customers want to access me? So how do they want to present risks to me, and what is it that I'm looking to get from those customers, and make that as frictionless as possible? Then I think there's a little bit, which is what you know, back to Shan's point around the operational enablement. So that is around how can I get my underwriters to be more effective, to spend more time, you know, looking, feeling, sniffing that risk, give them access to additional data to give them a better insight and understanding of what it is they're putting a price to, how they're then sort of creating those products and getting those out to customers. And then back to Mike's point, how are then we fulfilling our obligations to our carriers and our capacity providers around, you know, not just bordereaux, but unique data, insight, predictive analytics, etc., etc. So, you know, technology has a massive part, but I think it's less around auto underwriting or self-service. It's more really understanding where technology is an enabler for the business and how we can make that a better journey for our customers, colleagues, and capacity providers, all the C's in there. And look, you know, there's a lot of work for me to do in my MGA, because I've got 10 different businesses all on different trading platforms with different partners, some of which cross over. And so there is some real opportunity, but the key bit for me is it needs to be flexible, and it needs to really deliver what it is that you're trying to achieve, rather than trying to, you know, fit what you do into a certain platform or technology provider. And I think the other bit is, we need to be able to measure what we do. And, we'll talk about regulation, but one of the things that technology will enable us to do is genuinely measure and demonstrate outcomes from a customer perspective. So, having technology is going to be a real need in terms of meeting some of our obligations from a regulatory point of view in terms of reporting.
Absolutely, brilliant. And I want to kind of move things on a bit now.
Are you leaving AI, Matt? Can I just interject? I'm not going to do my usual rant, right, or even an unusual rant. Just to say, the FCA and Bank of England actually have just published their report on machine learning in financial services, right? And it doesn't shock me, but it'll possibly shock lots of people that actually insurance underwriting is considered to have a leading role in machine learning applications for underwriting in the UK. Now, to say that no fintechs at all contributed to this survey. So, for me, that means we don't actually know what's going on in the application of machine learning and AI, given the way that, as Mike and Jaime have said, AI actually is part of everything that we use in the data ecosystem because of the various different places that it's being deployed, for good or ill, right? But the other thing, I guess, I think is really significant and also comes back to the regulatory pillar and regulatory point that Jaime was saying is that, so there's a huge amount, preponderance of machine learning-led underwriting in insurance and also in other parts of financial services. Okay. There is not a bespoke system of governance of that machine learning anywhere, really, right? So, that to me is like, hello, that's another, if we're talking about, again, the future fundamentals or the here and now or the next fundamentals of success, if you're going to use the technology, you're going to have to recognize that there are competencies attached to that, including regulatory. So yeah, end of sermon, if you like.
Thanks, Shan. And Jaime, just picking up on Shan's point there about the lack of governance, do you see that as being an issue for the market?
Around AI?
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't say there's a lack of governance in the
around
market.
AI.
Yeah, because I suppose there's two parts to it. So one is, ultimately it is still learning and still evolving. So and some of that machine learning is is a result of what it's being exposed to. So I guess one of the areas that we need to be really, really careful about is how we interpret the outputs of that based on what is a relatively small input into that machine learning. So how do we actually make sure that there's enough breadth and scale? So I've seen examples of, as Mike mentioned, the risk triage. Now that's great, and that's fine, because that's a set of rules that I as a business will have put into that to say, if it looks and feels like this, then it will get more outputs coming out of the things that it's seeing. Is that what's happening, and gives me data and insight to be able to do something about it. If it's about the predictive analytics of that risk and whether or not it's more likely to claim, and therefore there is more opportunity for rate or risk mitigations. The challenge that you've got at the moment is that it's still a small exposure, and so what I'm nervous about is that then starts to become the norm based on a very small kind of application of that use. And so I don't know what governance of it would look like, but we do need to be cautious about just the lack of exposure and different variances that it would have in order to drive some of those behaviors, because we've seen it in other areas where machine learning and algorithms are triggering certain things, but it's only based on, it's only as good as the input it gets, and it's only as sophisticated as the amount of data that's going into it. I'm not sure I articulated that in the best way, but so I do think the lack of governance is a challenge, but I don't know where you'd start, let's face it.
Sure, no. Thank you, brilliant. So just before we move on to the next topic, we've had a couple of questions come in, which I'll pick up later because they might be relevant to some of our later conversations, but just a reminder to pop in any questions to the Q&A if you do have any, and I'll put those to the panelists a bit later on. So picking up on a point I think it was that Shan made around the war for talent in the industry. It seems to be a bit of an issue across a lot of the market, across insurance as a whole, really. Mike, what are you seeing as the challenges facing MGAs in particular in this regard, and how can they, I suppose, overcome the challenges around recruiting talent?
Well, I think it's underwriting expertise, which everyone's particularly after, frankly. I think there's been a flight from traditional insurers of underwriters going into MGAs, because MGAs provide a sort of entrepreneurial environment which underwriters, particularly certain underwriters particularly aspire to, because they're allowed to underwrite and they can get close to their brokers, etc., and perhaps become a little bit disillusioned with sort of labyrinth of meetings in sort of large sort of insurance companies, which is all part of a large insurance company governance. But there's certainly a flight from insurers to MGAs, and you've only got to look around the number of insurers who are effectively advertising and looking to try and increase their underwriting sort of a community, and that comes back to the need for the big insurers to sort of try and deliver a reasonable level of service, which they're all struggling to do at this moment in time. I think in terms of retaining, I think if you're going to sort of obviously depend on the MGA, part of the attractiveness is for some underwriters is that they would get skin in the game on those MGAs depending on its ownership. So they really have a say and a stake in terms of the profitability and the direction of travel of that sort of particular organisation. So that's attractive. I think also, when you talk about war on talent, the requirements for the employer to attract people is now so much wider and goes way beyond in terms of just the salary and package. People now look at the CSR, ESG type approach of that company and say whether this is a type of organisation I now want to work for. And that comes up often talking to sort of recruitment consultants. It comes up often in the interviews where people may be offered the role but say, well, your culture is not someone where I need to sort of work at. So it's much wider in terms of from that piece. I think it's likely to continue for some period of time, that war on talent. I would say this, I think MGAs are retaining people, for the reasons I've articulated, probably slightly easier than perhaps with the larger insurers. But it is a problem. And the final thing I'd end on is, of course, what we have seen sort of during the pandemic is that, people looked at lifestyle during that lockdown, and some people decided to exit the industry. And they exited because they felt they could, and most of those people would have had significant experience, who added real value to everyone in all stakeholders. So it's a problem which is not going to go away. And I think as an industry, what we need to try and all do is encourage, at the lower end, of people to come and enter the industry and show that insurance is an exciting place. It's a great sort of profession. Lots of great characters. And we need to try and all work together to try and make that as attractive as possible.
And Jaime, kind of, how big is the challenge? How big is the recruitment challenge at Geo, and where do you see kind of MGAs offering something a bit different? How can they win that war for talent, as Shan said they were earlier?
Yeah, look, I know it's not. It's never quite as exciting when everyone's agreeing with each other on a call, because but equally it's hard to sort of disagree with lots of the comments when when it is a common challenge. So the war on talent is not unique to MGAs. It's it's a thing we talk about a lot, depending on what part of the industry that you're in. And Mike's absolutely right. It's about enticing people to join this market. And realize that it isn't just about underwriting, or it isn't just about being a sales guy out on the road. There are so many different facets to the industry. It's really important. MGAs, I think, bring a unique challenge, because if I'm talking about the fact that I am bringing specialisms, unique access to certain areas from a distribution point of view, or unique insights, that comes with the fact that you need to find people that have got those specialisms and those talents, and so it's a small pool of people. So investing really heavily in talent and development and career progression is what we're doing as a group. So apprenticeships, underwriting academies, giving people more access and more exposure across our organisation to help grow and therefore hopefully retain that talent. But you know, it's not a unique challenge to us. It's part and parcel, I think, of the insurance cycle. But one thing I think is probably starting to be more relevant at the moment, and Mike touched on it, is lots of exits from a sort of a traditional basis into the MGA space, and then, you know, a bit of a dearth of talent in that space, and therefore a huge pay increase to go back. What does an MGA offer? Well, it does give flexibility. There is something unique and interesting about working in this space, and an opportunity to really create products and propositions that are unique to the market that we are trying to support. And, you know, we aren't necessarily tied down by legacy technology or, you know, traditional methodologies. It doesn't mean that we don't necessarily have all of the corporate governance that sits alongside it, but it tends to be in a slightly different way. So, you know, we do offer a slightly more entrepreneurial business to work in. It is interesting and exciting, but, you know, it still comes with the challenges that I think the industry is facing as a whole.
Fantastic. And Shan, I think I might have misquoted you there. Is David Howden that said MGAs were winning the war for talent, so apologies about that. But if I can come to you now, picking up on a point that it was definitely Mike made around kind of CSR and attracting kind of maybe the younger generation. Shan, I know ESG is very kind of close to you and you're very involved in that. Do you see that as an important factor for companies looking to attract new talent and, as Mike said, you know, make the industry more appealing?
So I would just say CSR is the old world language, and ESG is much, much more than CSR plus a few bells on. I do think that's important, actually, for all sorts of reasons, but I won't go into that now. So you're saying to me, Matt, how important is specifically ESG relating to the talent and those, because, do you know, it's really interesting though, isn't it? When people talk about entrepreneurial in a corporate of any description, what do they actually mean by that? I suspect one of the key things they mean by that is, can I please just do something that means something and get paid for it and work with other people who aren't going to treat me like shit, either hierarchically, institutionally, or, you know, in terms of values, or make me feel that I'm not contributing to something worthwhile. See, as an accidental insurance obsessive, I actually think what insurance does is not just hugely important and socially necessary, but actually really quite noble. Now, some people will go, oh, please, it's a means to make enormous amounts of money and swan around London, the city of London particularly. That is also true. So I think, what does that, I do think this, it's not quite a sort of philosophical debate, although it probably is a little bit. That meaning of entrepreneurial, the space to do meaningful stuff and to learn stuff and to contribute and grow your own technical expertise, and a way of contributing to something that is beyond shareholder value, is beyond paying the VC or the PE. I really do think, for a whole variety of rather complicated and sometimes very simple reasons, people are sick of the old rules that all of us on this call grew up with, right? We grew up with that old mentality. And I think there's a number of reasons for that, Matt, but I think it is unarguable that you're either going to be on the right side or the wrong side of net zero. And, you know, for all of those people out there who are under 30, that's not just a sort of future impact. That's what's going to happen, right? I mean, it's going to happen to all of us, but we're slightly older on this call, right? So maybe slightly more difficult for us to tune into the imminence of that. So I think the net zero thing, I think the social. So when I think about the MGAs that I know a little bit better, who have deliberately chosen to tackle some of the hardest issues through insurance, so exclusion, for example. So I think about Armour Karma. They're not making life easy for themselves by creating a business that's focused on generation rent. It's hard. And all those things around customer acquisition and convincing capacity that your business model isn't mad, actually, and all the rest of it. That's not the easy route, but they're doing that because they think not only can they make a difference, but they can make a decent return as well for all the people that are investing in them. And then on the G side of things, I mean, I think if you become aware that you're working for a business that actually has no thought around, are we using social media in a way that's future-proofing our organisation about massive reputational damage? So, for instance, anyone that's bought into anything that incorporates facial recognition, I do think the clock's ticking for all kinds of reasons. And certainly, you know, social scoring, the alarm bell's going, because social scoring is going to be, you know, illegal across the world. So I think, you know, there's a mixture, isn't there, of, you know, people want to have a future and they want to contribute and they want to be experts and specialists and working with other people that they're doing something and creating a meaningful as well as a materially, you know, good life for themselves. And I think that the things that go into this massive and complicated area of ESG, yes, are about what it is to be a human and have a meaningful life, but equally it's about it's being part of this business actually going to result in me having, you know, a sustainable pay over the years and feel proud about what I do. And am I going to learn? Am I going to be part of a culture that's going to support me to do the best job that I can do? Yeah, I mean, obviously, I therefore think it's a material business factor, right? And it's based on humans. It's based on, you know, people that are inherently uncontrollable, which of course is what insurance and risk is actually all about, right?
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Shan. I want to move on a bit now to regulation. And Jaime, you've come into a bit of an interesting time with all the changes we've seen. We've had JIP, fair value, consumer duty, you know, even on the front line of dealing with this. How have you seen it? What are your thoughts on all of the new regulations?
So look, if you zoom right out and we think about regulation, fundamentally it's about doing the right thing for clients at its a very basic level. So, you know, I think the challenge is the fact that, you know, we're in a situation where he continuously needs to be reiterated. But why wouldn't I want to provide fair value, take action to mitigate risk of harm, you know, give clear and timely information about my products and services? Why wouldn't I want to do that? I mean, you know, there's a real question mark if that wasn't the case. However, you know, and I do recognise as an industry, the intent is always there to do those things. But are we able to genuinely demonstrate it? Can we be sure it happens consistently in every aspect of our, you know, day-to-day business interactions, customer interactions, every part of the chain? And how do we measure it and then continue to demonstrate that we're taking action against it? So, you know, there's a key bit for me, which is, you know, the sort of the consumer duty work that we're doing. You know, it gives me an opportunity to look at my business with, you know, those good customer outcome lenses and really challenge what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. Can I measure? Can I act on the findings that are coming out of it? And can I make my business a better business? I'm not saying it's going to be an easy thing to sort of deliver against, which is why, you know, the whole industry will have a project that's associated with it, the same as we have with any other regulatory changes. But, you know, if I come back to your question, which is what are my thoughts? Well, fundamentally, it's about continuing to do the right thing for our customers and our colleagues, and ensuring that we can genuinely demonstrate it and act when we aren't. So, you know, it's a good thing. We just need to make sure that, you know, we're able to balance that with, you know, not just reporting for reporting's sake. You know, it needs to be meaningful and, you know, a little bit more clarity about, you know, some of the ambiguity in certain areas. But, you know, the one thing I do predict is when there is any big regulatory changes that come, the market gets quite buoyant, doesn't it? See a lot of M&A happening as a result of it, as people then decide whether or not they, you know, they're gonna go to the effort of some of those business changes, or seek the support and additional you know, infrastructure that potentially it comes from being part of a slightly larger firm. You know, I am lucky being part of a large group that I get, you know, a huge amount of excellent support in order to deliver against those. But I think it'll be interesting over the course of the coming months, you know, just how difficult it'll be for people to implement some of these changes and what that might mean in terms of sort of market activity as a result of it.
Sure. And Mike, what's your thought on all of this?
Yeah, well, I think that the word is proportionate, and I think there are some of the requests from the regulator are very disproportionate. So if you look at fair value, and fair value assessment, there's not been one product has been withdrawn, despite the whole industry effectively sort of responding in terms of fair value across the value chain. You know, we had a very constructive conversation with the regulator on behalf of our members a couple of weeks ago. I think there was something I read this morning from Steve White's Beaver team, which suggested a small broker is spending nearly 6,000 hours if they've got X number of agencies in terms of delivering fair value attestation, which is just ridiculous. So I think it's proportionate is the key, which we always talk back to the regulator. No one, pick it up on Jaime's point, I don't think anyone in the industry gets up in the morning wanting to give poor value, right? No one gets up and says, I'm not going to pay a valid claim today. You know, that just isn't sort of in anyone's DNA. Everyone's trying to do, because we're all customers ourselves. You know, we all buy insurance ourselves. So I think, you know, we as the association will continue to work with other associations on behalf of our members, talking to the regulator around proportionality, around what they're requesting, because the outputs, and this is what we have said to the regulator, is that regulation, disproportionate regulation, will stop some organisations introducing new products because they will just say it's just not worth it, right? So again, that's stifling innovation and actually could harm consumer choice, because some products are just not coming to market because of the regulation from that piece. And separately on the fair value thing, we want to talk about scope. And we've got a commitment to go back and say what should be in scope going forward. And, you know, the current mood music is that should it actually be non-advised products, which actually should be in that fair value and not where brokers are providing professional advice, you know, because that's their job and that's what they do extremely well. So I wouldn't say it's a losing battle, because I think I've got to give credit where it's due to the regulator that they are listening, and they actually, you know, acted and asked to speak to us and get feedback and from the trade associations. But what I can say is fair value is here to stay. So Matt Brewer's made that very, very clear. It is here to stay, but hopefully, you know, here to stay, but in what guise will be more beneficial to the stakeholders.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Mike. So we're coming towards the end of the session now, and I just want to put forward a couple of the questions we've had coming in. We've had one here from Samir Segal, and apologies if I've pronounced your name wrong there. But he's asked, how do you think the future of MGA will respond to the growing trend of hyper-personalisation and active management of risks being underwritten? What are the kind of thoughts on that? Shan, maybe as the accidental techie here, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, but we probably don't have enough time. I mean, I would just say, I think whilst we have a situation where the technologies and the data, the management and governance of the data across the whole data ecosystem, because insurance doesn't operate in a vacuum. We generate our own data, but we ingest, suck in, buy loads of data from other people. Those things are not, to my mind, fit for purpose, right? So whilst we're, I mean, I feel like two things. I feel like the enabling technologies and data that purport to offer hyper-personalization are not fit for purpose. I don't think they're fit for purpose for the firms, and I certainly don't think they're fit for purpose for the customers, whoever those customers are. So, I mean, why the hell would you if you haven't got it sorted out first? You know, screw fail fast in this instance. That does not work for anybody. And when you do that, don't be surprised if you get, quotes, disproportionate regulatory response, right? The second thing, I guess, on hyper-personalization is, I know for a fact that purposeful, thoughtful, informed, experienced insurance professionals across all functions, but particularly in compliance and particularly in underwriting, tell me regularly it is impossible to have a conversation about this personalization thing. Do we really think it's the best thing for customer and for our business models and for insurance, which is about, by the way, pooled risk? You cannot have those conversations and be taken seriously. No one outside the firm, you know, in other words, the people that shape the narratives, which is the trade press, the financial press, the tech press, the analysts and the VCs, nobody wants to talk about that either, because it's not sexy and cool and it doesn't fuel valuations and page views, right? I don't think that's safe. if we can't have those conversations safely without people being labelled Luddites or dinosaurs or just thick, then that's not safe. So yeah, having said not enough time, hopefully I haven't sucked up too much time, but two thoughts there in response to that question, Matt.
No, thanks very much for that. And another question come in, and one for you maybe, Mike. And they've asked, do you see any new capacity providers entering the market in 2023? And they're saying, particularly thinking about possible entrants from the US market.
So quick answer would be yes. I'm certainly aware of 2 organisations who will come if they get through their regulatory direction of travel. They will be trading in 2023, and they will be trading exclusively for MGA business only. Okay, so I can't really say any more than that in terms of, so that's a yes for that. I also see probably an increase in fronting as well. I see that coming through in terms of which would have reinsurance capacity, and you may see some US organisations operate in the UK on a fronting basis. So I think as we've talked in the last hour, I think the MGA sort of market is buoyant. It relies on capacity clearly, and I see an increase in influx of more capital for specialist MGAs 2023 and beyond.
Fantastic. And Jaime, any additional thoughts there?
Yeah, I guess it'll also be somewhat driven by how well the pound is faring as well. So I'm sure there are going to be far more people interested. But yeah, just to echo the comments from Mike. So certainly the conversations we're having at a broader level are, it's not alternative capacity, but it's not what I would determine the traditional, they are sort of areas that want to grow in the UK. They see MGAs as being a really unique way of doing that because we have access to distribution, we've got specialisms, and we can support their infrastructure and their development plans moving forward. So yeah, I can definitely see the balance shift in terms of a sort of non-traditional capacity coming in, certainly from around the world.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Well, that brings us to the end of today's session. We did have a couple more questions in the Q&A there, and I'll try and answer those kind of offline with the panelists, and we'll put it in our coverage on our website shortly. But I just want to say thanks once again to Mike, Shan, and Jaime for joining me and Dan today, and thanks to everyone who tuned in to watch as well. Keep an eye out for the MGA performance report, and we'll be sending that out via the newsletter, as Dan said, in the next week or two. I also just wanted to make people aware that we're also offering a 7-day trial of our platform now, so you can go and have a look at what we're doing for yourselves. You can register for that even at insurancedatalab.com, or if you send an email to Dan at insurancedatalab.com, we'll set you up there. Lots of Dans in that sentence. The platform includes a wide range of data from a variety of different sources to help keep track of company performance, covering everything from underwriting performance and financial results to complaints handling and customer experience. So do drop us a line if you're interested in that. But apart from that, thanks again for watching, and from Dan and me, take care. Thank you.